There is a kind of loneliness that doesn't make sense on paper. You have people around you. You have places to go. You have a life that, from the outside, looks connected enough. And yet, somewhere deep inside, there is a quiet ache that never fully goes away. The feeling that you are standing just outside the circle, that everyone else received instructions you never got, that no matter where you go or who you are with, something essential is missing. If you have ever looked around a room full of people and felt completely invisible, if you have ever smiled and laughed while a small voice inside whispered, "They don't really know you," then tonight this is for you. You're not broken. You're not too much or too little. You're simply someone who has been carrying an ache that finally deserves to be understood. You know this feeling, even if you have never had the words for it. It is not the sharp sting of a specific rejection. It is not the temporary loneliness of a quiet weekend or a cancelled plan. It is something deeper, something that has been with you for so long that you almost forget it is there, until suddenly, in a crowded room or a family gathering or a moment that should feel like connection, it rises up and whispers, "You don't belong here either." This is the ache that has no name. The quiet grief of moving through a world where everyone else seems to fit, while you hover at the edges, watching, waiting, wondering what is wrong with you. And the strange thing is, you have probably gotten very good at hiding it. You smile, you engage, you say the right things at the right times. You have learned the rhythms of social interaction well enough to pass as someone who belongs. But underneath the performance, there is a tiredness, a loneliness that doesn't match your circumstances, a sense that if people really knew you, if they saw beneath the surface, they would confirm what you have always secretly feared, that you are fundamentally different, that you are on the outside of something everyone else is on the inside of, that belonging for you is a language you are never taught to speak. Let yourself breathe for a moment. Let yourself be here, exactly as you are, with this ache you have carried for so long. Because tonight, we're not going to fix it. We're not going to rush towards solutions or pretend that a few insights will erase years of feeling like an outsider. Tonight, we are simply going to understand it, to name it, to honour it. And perhaps, in that honouring, something will begin to soften. The human need to belong is not a preference. It is not a personality trait or a sign of weakness. It is one of the most fundamental drives we possess, as essential to our survival as food or water or shelter. Psychologists have studied this for decades, and the research is clear. We are wired for connection. Our brains evolved in tribes where belonging meant survival and exclusion meant death. This is not metaphor. This is biology. When you feel like you don't belong, your nervous system registers it as danger. Your body responds as if you are under threat because in the ancient architecture of your brain you are. In 1995, psychologists Roy Baumeister and Mark Leary proposed what they called the belongingness hypothesis. They argued that the need to form and maintain strong, stable interpersonal relationships is a fundamental human motivation that shapes nearly everything we do. We don't just want to belong, we need to belong. And when that need goes unmet, we suffer in ways that are measurable, physical, and profound. This is why the ache of not belonging cuts so deep. It is not that you're too sensitive. It is not that you are making a big deal out of nothing. Your brain is responding to a genuine threat, a signal that something essential for your survival is missing. And when that signal persists, when the ache of not belonging becomes a constant companion rather than a passing feeling, it changes you. It shapes how you see yourself, how you move through the world, how you relate to others. You may have noticed that this feeling lives in your body, not just your mind. There is a tension you carry, a watchfulness, a subtle bracing against the next moment of disconnection. You scan rooms without realizing it, looking for signs of where you might fit, where you might be welcome, where you might finally be seen. Your shoulders hold the weight of 1,000 small exclusions. Your chest carries the tightness of words you never said, invitations you never received, moments where you reached out and found only empty air. This is exhausting, and no one talks about how exhausting it is. Because from the outside you look fine, you function, you show up, but inside you're running a constant calculation, measuring your words, adjusting your presentation, trying to find the version of yourself that might finally be acceptable, might finally belong. And still, it doesn't work. No matter how much you adapt, no matter how carefully you perform, there is always that gap, that invisible barrier between you and the easy belonging you see in others. You watch people connect effortlessly, falling into friendships and groups and relationships as if it were the most natural thing in the world. And you wonder what they know that you don't. What secret handshake you missed. What essential quality you lack. But here is what you may not realize. The ache you feel is not evidence that something is wrong with you. It is evidence that something happened to you. Somewhere along the way, you received messages, explicit or implicit, that you were not quite right, that you needed to be different to be accepted, that belonging was conditional, earned, always at risk of being revoked. And those messages sank deep into your nervous system, into your sense of self, into the very way you experience being alive in a social world. The pain of not belonging is real. Neuroscience research has shown that social rejection activates the same regions of the brain that process physical pain. When you feel excluded, when you feel like an outsider, your brain responds as if you've been physically hurt. This is not weakness. This is not oversensitivity. This is your brain doing exactly what it evolved to do, alerting you to a threat to your survival, urging you to find your way back to the safety of the group. But what happens when there is no group that feels safe? What happens when the exclusion is not a single event but a chronic condition? What happens when you have felt like an outsider for so long that you no longer remember what belonging might feel like? This is where the ache becomes something more. It becomes an identity, a lens through which you see everything, a quiet assumption that runs beneath every interaction. I'm on the outside, I'm different, I do not fit. And the tragedy is that this assumption, once it takes hold, tends to confirm itself. You hold back, expecting rejection, and others read your distance as disinterest. You watch from the margins, waiting to be invited in, and others assume you prefer to be alone. You protect yourself from the pain of exclusion by never fully showing up, and in doing so you ensure that the connection you long for remains forever out of reach. This is not your fault. Please hear that. This is not a flaw in your character or a failure of your social skills. This is what happens when the need to belong goes unmet for too long. The heart, trying to protect itself, builds walls. The mind, trying to make sense of repeated pain, creates stories. And the self, trying to survive, learns to expect the very thing it fears most. But here is something else, something important. The ache you feel, the loneliness that doesn't match your circumstances, the sense of being perpetually on the outside. This is not the whole truth of who you are. It is a wound. It is a pattern. It is a story you learned so early and so deeply that it feels like reality. But stories can be rewritten. Patterns can be interrupted. Wounds, with enough gentleness and time, can heal. You do not have to fix anything tonight. You do not have to be different or better or more acceptable. You simply have to be here, breathing, listening, allowing yourself to be witnessed in this tender place. Because the first step toward healing is not change, it is recognition. It is finally seeing what you've been carrying and saying, yes, this is real. This is what I have felt, and it makes sense that I feel this way. So many of us walk through the world with this invisible ache, smiling and functioning and pretending everything is fine. We don't talk about it because we don't have words for it. We don't share it because we fear it would only confirm our outsider status. We carry it alone, which only deepens the loneliness, which only reinforces the belief that we are fundamentally separate from others. But you are not as alone as you feel. That is one of the strange paradoxes of this particular kind of loneliness. The feeling of not belonging is one of the most universal human experiences there is. Millions of people, right now, in this very moment, are lying awake with the same quiet ache you carry. They are wondering what is wrong with them. They are watching others connect and feeling that same invisible barrier. They are performing belonging while secretly feeling like imposters. They are you, and you are them. There is a strange comfort in this, if you let yourself feel it. Not a solution, but a softening. The recognition that this ache, as personal as it feels, is part of the human condition. That the longing to belong and the pain of not belonging has been felt by countless hearts across time and culture and circumstance. You are not uniquely broken. You're not alone in your aloneness. Let that settle for a moment. Let your shoulders drop just slightly. Let your breath deepen just a little. You've been carrying this ache for so long. You've been trying so hard to solve it, to fix yourself, to become someone who finally fits. And tonight, just for now, you can set that burden down. You can let yourself be exactly who you are, ache and all, and know that it is enough, that you are enough, that the longing you feel is not a sign of your failure, but a sign of your humanity. In the acts that follow, we will go deeper. We will explore where this feeling comes from, how it takes root in childhood, how it becomes woven into identity. We will look at the masks you've learned to wear, the performances you have perfected, the exhausting work of trying to belong somewhere that never quite feels like home, and we will begin, gently, to find another way. A way that does not require you to fix yourself. A way that starts, perhaps, with simply coming home to who you already are. But for now, just breathe. Just rest in the recognition that you've been seen, that the ache you carry has finally been named, and that somewhere, in the quiet of this moment, a small part of you can finally exhale. To understand where you are, you must first understand where you began. And for so many who carry this quiet ache of not belonging, the roots stretch back further than memory can reach. Back to a time when you were small, when your nervous system was still forming, when you were learning, without words, without conscious thought, what it meant to be you in relation to others. This is where it often starts. Not with a single dramatic event, but with something subtler. Something that happened or didn't happen in the thousands of small moments that made up your earliest years. Before you could speak, before you could even form coherent thoughts, you were already learning about belonging. You were learning whether the world was safe or dangerous, whether your needs would be met or ignored, whether your presence was welcomed or merely tolerated. This learning happened not through words, but through sensation, through the way you were held or not held, through the rhythm of responses to your cries, through the faces that looked back at you and what you saw reflected there. Psychologists call this attachment. In the 1950s and 60s, a British psychiatrist named John Bowlby began to study the profound bond between infants and their caregivers. He discovered that this early relationship was not just emotionally important, but biologically essential. Babies are born helpless, completely dependent on others for survival, and so they come into the world wired for connection, programmed to seek closeness with caregivers, to protest when separated, to feel safe only in the presence of those they are attached to. This is not neediness. This is nature. This is the ancient wisdom of a species that survives through bonds. But here is what Bowlby and those who followed him discovered. The quality of those early bonds shapes everything that comes after. When a baby reaches out and is consistently met with warmth, with attunement, with responsiveness, something profound happens. The baby learns, at the deepest level of their being, that they are worthy of response, that their needs matter, that the world is a place where reaching out leads to connection. This becomes the foundation of what psychologists call secure attachment, and from this foundation, a child can venture out into the world with confidence, knowing that they have a safe base to return to, knowing that they belong. But what happens when that reaching out is not met? What happens when the baby cries and no one comes? Or when the response is inconsistent, unpredictable, tinged with frustration or absence? What happens when the face looking back at the child is blank or distracted or filled with emotions that have nothing to do with the child at all? This is where the first seeds of not belonging are planted, not through cruelty necessarily, not through obvious neglect or abuse, but through the subtle, repeated experience of reaching out and not being met, of expressing a need and having it overlooked, of looking into a caregiver's eyes and not seeing yourself reflected back. Psychologists call this attunement, the capacity of a caregiver to perceive and respond to a child's inner experience. When attunement is present, a child feels seen. They feel that their emotions make sense, that their needs are valid, that who they are is acceptable. But when attunement is absent, even partially, even intermittently, a child begins to draw a different conclusion. They begin to sense, in ways too deep for words, that something about them is not quite right, that their needs are too much, that their feelings are inconvenient, that the truest parts of themselves are somehow unwelcome. This is not a conscious belief. A 3-year-old does not think, my emotional needs are being inadequately mirrored, and this will affect my sense of belonging in adulthood. But the nervous system knows, the body knows, and this knowing becomes encoded in implicit memory, in the felt sense of self that operates beneath conscious awareness. It becomes the water you swim in, so pervasive that you don't even recognize it as water. Maybe you grew up in a home where emotions were not discussed, where sadness was met with discomfort, where anger was quickly shut down, where fear was dismissed as silliness. Maybe your parents loved you, truly loved you, but did not know how to be present with your inner world. Maybe they were dealing with their own pain, their own unprocessed trauma, their own overwhelming circumstances, and so they were there physically but absent emotionally. They provided food and shelter and birthday parties, but something essential was missing, something you could never quite name. This is what psychologist Janice Webb calls childhood emotional neglect. And what makes it so insidious is that it leaves no visible marks. There are no bruises to point to, no dramatic stories to tell. From the outside, your childhood might have looked fine, even good. And this makes it so much harder to understand why you feel the way you feel. You find yourself thinking, nothing bad happened to me. Why do I struggle so much with connection? Why do I always feel like an outsider? But emotional neglect is not about what happened. It is about what didn't happen. It is the absence of attunement, the absence of emotional presence, the absence of being truly seen for who you are. And in that absence, a child learns to disappear. They learn that their authentic self is not welcome, so they tuck it away. They learn that their needs create burden, so they stop expressing them. They learn that belonging is conditional, available only to a version of themselves that is more acceptable, more convenient, less real. Perhaps you were the sensitive one in a family that valued toughness, the quiet one in a family of loud voices, the dreamer in a house of pragmatists, the one who felt things deeply in a home where feelings were suspect. And without anyone saying it directly, you received the message, you are different, you don't fit here, something about you needs to change. Family systems theorists have studied the roles that children take on within families. There is the hero child who achieves and performs to bring pride to the family. There is the scapegoat who carries the family's dysfunction and becomes the identified problem. There is the lost child who fades into the background, asking for nothing, causing no trouble, slowly becoming invisible. And there is the mascot who uses humour to deflect from the family's pain. These roles are not chosen consciously. They emerge from the family's unspoken dynamics, from the gaps and needs and dysfunctions that exist beneath the surface. Maybe you recognize yourself in one of these roles. Maybe you were the lost child, the one who learned that the safest way to belong was to not take up space. Maybe you were the scapegoat, the one who was blamed, the one whose differences were treated as deficits, the one who learned that they were the problem. Or maybe you were the hero, performing endlessly, achieving relentlessly, trying to earn through accomplishment what should have been given freely. The simple feeling of being accepted as you are. Whatever role you took on, whatever adaptations you made, they came at a cost. Because when you shape yourself to fit a family that cannot see you, you lose access to your own authentic self. You become an expert at reading others, at anticipating needs, at becoming who you need to be for any given moment. But you lose touch with who you actually are. And this creates a particular kind of loneliness, the loneliness of being surrounded by family, of technically belonging, while feeling utterly unknown. And here is the part that is hardest to hear, but most important to understand. None of this was your fault. The child you were did not fail at belonging. The child you were was doing exactly what children do, adapting to survive. Children are not capable of looking at a dysfunctional family system and thinking, this environment is not meeting my emotional needs. I should seek support elsewhere. Children are dependent, vulnerable, desperate to maintain attachment to their caregivers because their survival literally depends on it. And so when the environment fails to provide secure attachment, the child does not blame the environment. The child blames themselves. This is the birth of the wound. The moment when a child, too young to understand what is happening, draws the conclusion that will shape their entire life. I am not enough. There is something wrong with me. I am the reason I don't belong. And this conclusion, once formed, becomes a filter through which all future experiences are interpreted. Every social rejection confirms it. Every moment of exclusion proves it. Every relationship that fails to satisfy the deep hunger for belonging becomes more evidence that the original wound was accurate, that you are fundamentally an outsider. But here is the truth that the wounded child could not see, and that the adult you are becoming is finally ready to hear. The problem was never you. The problem was an environment that could not provide what you needed. The problem was caregivers who, for whatever reason, could not offer the attunement, the presence, the unconditional acceptance that every child deserves. They may have loved you, they may have done their best, and still something essential was missing. Both of these things can be true. This is not about blame. Your parents were likely carrying their own wounds, their own unmet needs, their own histories of inadequate attunement. Hurt people, often without meaning to, often without even knowing they are doing it. Understanding the origins of your wound does not require villains. It only requires honesty. It only requires the willingness to see what was, not what should have been, not the story you told yourself to protect your caregivers, but the actual reality of what you experienced as a child. And here is why this matters. Because until you understand where the wound came from, you will keep trying to heal it in the wrong places. You will keep looking for belonging in groups that cannot give it, in relationships that repeat the original dynamic, in achievements that never quite fill the void. You will keep blaming yourself for not fitting, for not belonging, when the truth is that the template for not belonging was installed before you had any say in the matter. The roots of chronic non-belonging almost always reach back to these early years, to the attachment experiences that shaped your nervous system, to the attunement that was present or absent, to the family dynamics that assigned you a role that may never have fit who you actually were, to the subtle, pervasive emotional neglect that left no marks but shaped everything. And if you find yourself tonight with tears rising, with grief surfacing, with a strange ache for a childhood you did not have, that is not weakness. That is recognition. That is the adult you are beginning to see, perhaps for the first time, what the child you were endured. And that seeing, that witnessing, is not just important. It is sacred. Because the child you were needed someone to see what was happening. They needed someone to say, this is not okay, you deserve more. There is nothing wrong with you. And now, finally, you can be that someone. You don't have to fix anything tonight. You don't have to confront anyone or rewrite your history or forgive before you are ready. You simply have to know, to let the understanding settle into your bones, to recognize that the ache you carry, the sense of not belonging that has followed you all your life, did not come from nowhere. It has origins, it has roots, and roots once understood can finally begin to release their grip. So rest here for a moment, in this knowing. Let yourself breathe. Let yourself feel whatever is arising. The child you were is still inside you, still carrying the original wound, still waiting to be seen. And tonight, in the quiet of this moment, you are seeing them. perhaps for the first time, perhaps with the tenderness they always deserved but never received. That is enough for now. That is more than enough. Let the understanding settle. Let the grief move if it needs to. And trust that in the seeing, something is already beginning to heal. Something happens when a feeling persists long enough. It stops being just a feeling. It becomes part of who you believe yourself to be. And this is what happens with the ache of not belonging when it begins in childhood and continues without relief, without understanding, without anyone to name it and help you hold it. The feeling hardens into identity. The experience becomes a definition. And somewhere along the way you stop saying, I don't fit here. You start saying, I don't fit anywhere. I'm an outsider. This is who I am. This is the quiet tragedy that unfolds over years, often without your awareness. The wound from childhood, the early experiences of not being seen or attuned to, the roles you were assigned in your family, these do not simply heal on their own. Instead, they become the lens through which you see yourself and the world. They become the story you tell about who you are. And once that story takes hold, it begins to shape everything. You can probably trace the moments when this happened, even if you didn't recognize them at the time. Maybe it was in elementary school, when you stood at the edge of the playground, watching the other children play, wanting to join but not knowing how. Maybe it was in middle school, when social groups began to form and solidify, and you found yourself perpetually on the outside of every circle. Maybe it was in high school, when everyone seemed to know unwritten rules that you had never been taught, when belonging seemed to require a fluency you simply did not possess. Each of these experiences on its own might have been manageable. Children are resilient. They can recover from moments of exclusion, from the ordinary pain of social friction. But when the experiences accumulate, when they layer upon the foundation of early attachment wounds, something shifts. The child who already carried an implicit sense of not being quite right begins to receive external confirmation. The world seems to agree with what they secretly feared. They are different. They don't belong. And this agreement between inner wound and outer experience creates a kind of certainty that is very difficult to shake. The psychologist Erik Erikson described adolescence as the stage of identity formation, the period when we ask ourselves who we are and begin to construct a coherent sense of self. For many young people, this is a time of experimentation, of trying on different identities, of finding groups and communities that resonate with who they are becoming. But for those who enter adolescence already carrying the wound of not belonging, this stage takes on a different quality. Instead of freely exploring identity, they are working from a predetermined conclusion. The outsider identity formed in the crucible of early experience crystallizes during these years. It becomes fixed. It becomes who they believe themselves to be. And here is what makes this so painful and so persistent. Once an identity is formed, the mind works to maintain it. Psychologists call this self-schema theory. A schema is a mental framework that helps us organize and interpret information. And a self-schema is the framework we use to understand who we are. Once you have developed a self-schema as an outsider, your mind begins to filter all incoming information through that lens. You notice the evidence that confirms it and dismiss the evidence that contradicts it. You are invited to a party, and instead of feeling included, you think, they probably just felt obligated. Someone shows interest in being your friend, and you wonder, what do they really want? When will they realize I'm not worth knowing? A group welcomes you warmly, and you wait for the other shoe to drop for the moment when they will see through you and withdraw their acceptance. This is not pessimism. This is not low self-esteem in any simple sense. This is the outsider identity doing what identities do. Maintaining itself, seeking confirmation, filtering reality to match its expectations. Psychologist Geraldine Downey has studied what she calls rejection sensitivity, the tendency to anxiously expect, readily perceive, and overreact to rejection. Those who develop high rejection sensitivity are often those who experience rejection or neglect in childhood. Their nervous systems became calibrated to detect social threat, to scan constantly for signs that they are about to be excluded or abandoned, and this scanning, this hypervigilance becomes exhausting. You walk into every room already braced for rejection. You analyze every conversation for signs that you have said the wrong thing, revealed too much, failed some invisible test. You live in a state of constant alert, waiting for the belonging that was tentatively offered to be suddenly withdrawn. This is not paranoia, it is adaptation. A nervous system that learned early that belonging is unreliable, that connection can be withdrawn without warning, that safety is never guaranteed. This nervous system is doing exactly what it was designed to do. It is trying to protect you. It is trying to prepare you for the rejection it believes is inevitable. But in doing so, it creates the very outcome it fears. Because when you expect rejection, you behave in ways that make it more likely. You hold back, keeping parts of yourself hidden, never fully committing to connection. Others sense this reservation and mirror it back to you. You interpret their mirroring as confirmation of your outsider status, which reinforces your expectation of rejection, which causes you to hold back even more. This is the self-fulfilling prophecy of exclusion. The belief that you don't belong creates behaviors that ensure you won't. And there is something else, something that is difficult to admit but important to understand. Over time, the margins can start to feel safe. The outsider position, as painful as it is, becomes familiar. You know how to exist on the periphery. You know how to watch without being watched. You know how to observe the rituals of belonging from a safe distance, without risking the vulnerability of full participation. There is a strange comfort in this, a predictability. You may be lonely, but at least you're not surprised. At least you're not caught off guard by a rejection you didn't see coming. This is what psychologists describe when they talk about the protective function of avoidance. When something has hurt enough times, you learn to avoid it. And for those who've been wounded by failed attempts at belonging, the avoidance of close connection can feel like wisdom. It can feel like self-preservation. You tell yourself that you prefer solitude, that you don't need people the way others do, that you are fine on your own. And there may be truth in some of this. Solitude can be nourishing. Independence can be strength. But when these preferences are built on a foundation of fear, when they are strategies to avoid the pain of rejection, rather than genuine expressions of who you are, they become prisons disguised as choices. The observer position has its own seductions. From the margins, you can see things that those in the center cannot. You develop insight, sensitivity, the capacity to notice patterns and dynamics that others miss. Many artists and writers and thinkers have operated from this position, transforming their outsider status into a kind of creative advantage. And this is not nothing, this is real. But it can also become a rationalization, a way of making peace with an identity that was never freely chosen, a way of finding meaning in a wound that has never healed. The question is not whether the outsider identity is true. In some sense, it is true. You have felt like an outsider. You've had experiences that confirm this feeling. You have developed skills and sensitivities that come from living on the margins. But the deeper question is whether this identity is the whole truth, whether it is who you are, fundamentally and forever, or whether it is a story that was written by your early experiences and reinforced by the self-fulfilling dynamics that followed. Martin Seligman, the psychologist who developed the concept of learned helplessness, studied what happens when organisms are exposed to uncontrollable negative events. He found that after enough experiences of being unable to escape or change their circumstances, they stopped trying. Even when the circumstances changed, even when escape became possible, they had learned that effort was futile. They had given up. Something similar can happen with belonging. After enough experiences of reaching out and being rejected, of trying to fit and failing, of hoping for connection and finding only disappointment, you may have learned a kind of helplessness about belonging. You may have stopped trying, not because you don't want connection, but because some deep part of you has concluded that it is not available to you, that you are simply not the kind of person who gets to belong. But learned helplessness, Seligman also discovered, can be unlearned. The beliefs formed through painful experience can be challenged, revised, updated with new information. The identity that crystallized in adolescence, that was shaped by early wounds and reinforced by years of self-fulfilling prophecy, this identity is not fixed. It feels fixed. It feels like the most fundamental truth about who you are. But feelings, even deeply rooted feelings, are not always accurate reflections of reality. You're not the outsider identity. You're the one who carries it. And there is a difference. The identity is a pattern, a habit of perception, a story that has been repeated so many times it feels like fact. But you are the awareness that can notice this pattern. You are the consciousness that can begin to question this story. You're the possibility of something new, even if that newness feels impossible from where you stand right now. This does not mean that the pain of being an outsider is not real. It is real. It has shaped your life in profound ways. It has cost you connection, intimacy, the simple ease of feeling at home in the world. Honour in this pain, grieve in what you have lost, acknowledging the weight of what you have carried. This is not weakness. It is necessary. It is the foundation upon which something new can eventually be built. But it also means that you are not doomed. The outsider identity, as entrenched as it may feel, is not your destiny. It is adaptation, a response to circumstances that were not your fault and often not your choice. And adaptations, once they are understood, can be revised. Not easily, not quickly, not through willpower or positive thinking alone, but through the slow, patient work of seeing yourself clearly, of understanding where your patterns came from, of gently challenging the beliefs that no longer serve you. You have spent so much of your life watching from the outside, observing others as if through glass, wondering what it would feel like to be on the inside, to belong without effort, to move through the world with the easy confidence of someone who knows they are welcome, and that watching, that observing, has given you certain gifts, a depth of perception, a sensitivity to nuance, an understanding of what it means to long for something you cannot quite reach. But maybe, just maybe, you have watched long enough. Maybe it is time to consider gently and without pressure, that the glass you have been looking through is not a wall. It is a lens, a filter, a way of seeing that was installed so early you forgot it was there. And lenses can be changed, filters can be removed, the outsider identity can soften, shift, make room for new possibilities. Not tonight. Tonight is not for changing anything. Tonight is for understanding, for seeing how the wound became an identity, how the identity became a prophecy, how the prophecy confirmed itself again and again until it felt like fate. This seeing is not passive, it is not mere intellectualization, it is the beginning of freedom. So let yourself rest in this understanding, let yourself breathe. The outsider identity has been with you for so long, it has tried in its own way to protect you, and you can honor that, even as you begin to recognize that you are more than this identity, more than this story, more than the child who first felt the ache of not belonging and concluded that something was wrong with them. You are the one who is listening now, the one who is beginning to see, and that is enough. That is everything. When belonging feels impossible in your authentic form, you learn to become someone else. This is not a conscious choice. It is not deception in any malicious sense. It is survival. It is the wisdom of a child, and later an adolescent and eventually an adult, who has learned that the truest parts of themselves are not welcome. And so you adapt. You create versions of yourself that might be more acceptable. You learn to read what each environment requires and to become that as closely as you can manage. You develop what feels like a superpower, but is actually a wound dressed up as a skill. The ability to be whoever you need to be, for whoever you are with, in whatever moment you find yourself. This is the world of masks. And if you have lived with the ache of not belonging for long enough, you probably know this world intimately. You know the exhaustion of it, the loneliness of it, the strange grief of being surrounded by people who seem to accept you while knowing, in some quiet corner of your heart, that they are not accepting you at all. They are accepting the performance. They are welcoming the mask, and the real you remains hidden, unseen, utterly alone. The psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott wrote about this in the middle of the 20th century. He described what he called the false self, a protective persona that develops when a child's authentic expressions are not met with acceptance, when a child reaches out with their true feelings, their genuine needs, their real self, and is consistently met with disapproval, neglect, or misattunement. They learn that authenticity is dangerous. They learn that being real leads to rejection. And so they develop a false self, a carefully constructed presentation designed to gain the acceptance that their true self could not secure. This false self is not entirely false, of course. It is built from pieces of you, from observations of what works, from trial and error in the social world. But it is a curated version, an edited collection, a highlight reel designed to maximize approval and minimize rejection. And over time, if you wear the false self long enough, you may begin to forget that it is a mask at all. You may lose touch with who you are underneath. You may find yourself wondering in quiet moments whether there is even a real self left to discover. And so you learn to watch, to study the people around you, noticing what they valued, what they laughed at, what made them lean in or pull away. You became a student of social dynamics, not out of curiosity but out of necessity. You learned the rhythms of conversation, the appropriate responses, the right things to say at the right moments. You learn to mirror the energy of whoever you are with, to match their tone, to become a reflection of what they seem to want. This is what researchers call code switching, the practice of shifting between different modes of expression depending on the social context. Everyone does this to some degree. We speak differently at work than at home, differently with friends and with strangers. But for those who carry the deep wound of not belonging, code switching becomes something more extreme. It becomes a constant, exhausting performance. It becomes the primary mode of relating to the world. You don't just adjust your tone, you adjust your entire self. You become a chameleon, shifting colours to match every environment, never settling into a single stable sense of who you are. Maybe you know the specific masks you wear, the cheerful, agreeable version you present at work, the easygoing, low-maintenance version you offer to friends, the helpful, accommodating version you become with family, the confident, put-together version you display to acquaintances. Each mask has its own voice, its own posture, its own carefully calibrated set of responses, and you switch between them so fluidly that most people never notice. They think they are seeing you. They don't realise they are seeing a performance. And here is the thing about performances. They're exhausting. They require constant vigilance, constant adjustment, constant energy expenditure. You cannot relax into a mask the way you can relax into your own skin. Every social interaction becomes work, a task to be managed rather than an experience to be enjoyed. You leave gatherings drained, not because you dislike people, but because you've been labouring the entire time, monitoring your words, adjusting your expressions, managing the gap between who you are and who you are pretending to be. This is the hidden cost of chronic self-concealment. Research has shown that hiding your authentic self takes a measurable toll on well-being. It depletes cognitive resources, it increases stress, it interferes with the very connection it is designed to achieve. Because here is the painful irony. You wear masks to belong, but the masks prevent you from ever truly belonging. You're included, but not known. You're accepted, but for a version of yourself that is not real. And this creates a particular kind of loneliness, perhaps the loneliest kind of all. The loneliness of being surrounded by people who think they know you but don't. There is a term for this experience. Psychologists Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes identified it in 1978. They called it the imposter phenomenon, the persistent feeling that you are a fraud, that your success or acceptance is undeserved, that at any moment you will be exposed for who you really are. Those who experience imposter phenomenon live in constant fear of being found out. They attribute any acceptance they receive to their performance rather than their inherent worth. They believe that if people saw the real them, the acceptance would vanish. And for those who have built their social lives on masks, this fear is not irrational. It is an accurate reflection of the situation they have created. They have gained acceptance through performance, and so they naturally fear that without the performance, the acceptance would disappear. This is not paranoia, this is logic, and it creates a trap. The more acceptance you gain through masks, the more you fear losing that acceptance if the masks come off. And so you grip them tighter, you perform harder, you move further and further from your authentic self, even as you long more and more desperately to be seen for who you really are. The sociologist Charles Cooley introduced a concept in 1902 that helps explain why this pattern is so difficult to break. He called it the looking glass self, the idea that we form our sense of identity based on how we believe others perceive us. We look into the social mirror and see ourselves reflected in others' reactions. Their approval becomes our worth. Their rejection becomes our shame. And if you have spent your life wearing masks, the looking-glass self becomes deeply distorted. You see yourself through the lens of your performances. You measure your worth by the acceptance of your false self, and you have no idea what you would see in the mirror if you ever allowed your real self to be reflected. Maybe there were moments when a mask slipped, when you were too tired to perform, or too emotional to maintain the facade, or too comfortable in someone's presence to keep your guard up. And maybe, in those moments, something happened that reinforced the need for masks. Maybe the reaction you received was confusion, or distance, or subtle rejection. Maybe someone said, "You're not acting like yourself," not realizing that what they meant was, "You're not acting like the self I know how to relate to." And you learned, once again, that your authentic self was not welcome, that the mask was not just protection, it was requirement. And so the masks became heavier, more elaborate, more difficult to remove. You added layers, adjustments, refinements. You became so skilled at performing that you could do it almost automatically, reading rooms and calibrating responses without conscious thought. But somewhere underneath all those layers, the real you still exists, still waits, still hopes, perhaps against hope, that someday, somehow, you will be able to take off the masks and discover that you are still worthy of belonging, that you were always worthy, that the masks were never necessary in the first place, but you don't know that yet, and so you carry the grief of not knowing who you really are. Because when you have worn masks for long enough, the boundary between performance and authenticity becomes blurred. You can no longer clearly identify which parts of you are real and which are constructed. You don't know what you genuinely like versus what you've trained yourself to like, because it made you more acceptable. You don't know what you truly believe versus what you've adopted because it fit the environments you needed to fit. The masks have become so integrated that removing them feels less like liberation and more like amputation. What would be left? This is a terrifying question. And it is one that keeps many people locked in their performances forever. Better to be accepted as a mask than to risk rejection as a self. Better to be tired and lonely in company than to be exposed and alone. This logic makes sense. It has kept you safe in its own way. And honouring this, recognising the protective function of the masks is important. You did not develop these patterns because you were weak or fake or dishonest. You developed them because you were a child who needed belonging and could not secure it through authenticity. The masks were creative solutions to an impossible problem. They deserve respect, even as you begin to question whether you still need them. Because here is what the masks cost you. They cost you the very thing you were seeking. True belonging requires being known, and the masks prevent you from being known. They give you the appearance of inclusion while perpetuating the deeper isolation. They allow you to move through social spaces without too much pain, but also without ever experiencing the nourishment that genuine connection provides. They protect you from rejection, but also from acceptance. Because whatever acceptance you receive through a mask, your nervous system knows the truth. That is not me they are accepting, that is the performance. And the real me remains untouched, unknown, alone. The cost is also internal. Living in chronic self-concealment means living at a distance from yourself. It means not trusting your own instincts, your own feelings, your own preferences. It means second-guessing everything, running every impulse through the filter of how it will be perceived, whether it fits the current mask. It means exhaustion, depletion, a weariness that sleep does not fully touch. Because you're never off duty, even alone, you may find yourself rehearsing performances, analysing past interactions, preparing for future ones. The masks do not come off when you leave the room. They have become part of how you think. And yet, underneath all of this, the authentic self persists. It may be buried, it may be wounded, it may be so unfamiliar that you wouldn't recognise it if you saw it, but it is still there. The child who existed before the masks, who had genuine feelings and authentic impulses and a real self that deserved to be seen, that child is still within you. They're still waiting, and part of the healing journey, perhaps the most important part, is finding your way back to them. Learning to take off the masks one at a time in safe enough spaces. Learning to trust that you can be authentic and still survive. Learning that belonging, real belonging, was never about the performance at all, but that learning comes later. Tonight, it is enough to simply see. To recognize the masks you wear. To acknowledge the exhaustion of the performance. To grieve, perhaps, for all the moments when you were included but not known, accepted but not seen. This grief is real. It deserves space. And in making that space, in honouring what the masks have cost you, you're already beginning to loosen their grip. So rest here, in this recognition. Breathe. Let the weight of the performance, just for this moment, begin to lift. You've been working so hard for so long. And tonight you don't have to perform anything. You don't have to be any particular version of yourself. You can simply be. Whatever that is, whoever you are underneath, even if you don't fully know yet, that is okay. The knowing will come. For now, just rest. There is a particular kind of pain that is difficult to explain to anyone who has not felt it. It is not the sharp sting of clear rejection. It is not the obvious wound of being told you are unwelcome. It is something subtler, more confusing, and in some ways more isolating. It is the pain of almost belonging, of being included but not understood, of being present in rooms where you're technically welcome but never quite seen. This is the loneliness that hides in plain sight, the ache that persists even when, by all external measures, you should feel connected. You know this feeling. You have lived it countless times. The gathering where you laughed at the right moments and contributed to conversations and appeared, to any outside observer, to be part of the group. But something was missing. Some essential current of connection that everyone else seemed plugged into while you remained somehow outside the circuit. You went home afterward feeling more alone than if you had stayed by yourself. And you wondered, as you always wonder, what is wrong with you? Why you can be surrounded by people and still feel so fundamentally isolated. This is the paradox of almost belonging. It offers enough to keep you hoping, but never enough to satisfy. It gives you proximity without intimacy, inclusion without understanding, presence without being truly present. And because the inclusion is real, because you are technically part of the group or the friendship or the relationship, it becomes very difficult to name what is missing. You have no grounds for complaint. You should be grateful. Other people would love to have what you have, and so the pain goes unspoken, unvalidated, often even unrecognized by you yourself. The psychologist Kipling Williams has spent decades studying ostracism, the experience of being excluded or ignored. His research has revealed something that might seem counterintuitive. partial inclusion, being sometimes included and sometimes excluded, being present but peripheral, can be just as painful as complete rejection. Sometimes more so, because complete rejection, as painful as it is, offers clarity. You know where you stand. You can grieve what you do not have and begin to move forward. But partial inclusion keeps you in a state of perpetual uncertainty. Am I in or out? Do they really want me here? Is this real connection or just politeness? This uncertainty is exhausting. It keeps your nervous system in a state of constant vigilance, scanning for cues, analysing interactions, trying to determine whether you truly belong or are merely being tolerated. And because the signals are mixed, because there are moments of apparent connection alongside moments of subtle exclusion, you never reach solid ground. You oscillate between hope and disappointment, between feeling almost part of something and feeling utterly outside it. And here is what makes this particularly painful for those who carry the deeper wound of not belonging. The almost is worse than the never because it activates hope. When you are clearly excluded, you can protect yourself. You can build walls, lower expectations, stop reaching out. But when you are almost included, when connection seems just within reach, you keep trying. You keep hoping. You keep investing energy and vulnerability into relationships that never quite return what you put in. And each time the almost fails to become fully, something inside you breaks a little more. Think of the friendships you have had that looked right from the outside but felt hollow from within. The people who seemed to enjoy your company but never quite understood you. The conversations that stayed on the surface no matter how you tried to go deeper. The moments when you shared something real, something vulnerable, and were met with a response that missed the mark entirely. Not rejection exactly, not unkindness, just a subtle mismatch. A sense that they were responded to someone, but that someone was not quite you. This is what happens when others relate to their idea of you rather than to you yourself. They have constructed a version of you in their minds, based on your masks, your performances, your surface presentation, and they respond to that version. They include that version. They may even love that version. But the real you, the one beneath the masks, the one longing to be seen, remains invisible. And this creates a grief that is very difficult to name. You have connection, you have people in your life, and yet you are starving. Psychologists sometimes use the term social hunger to describe this experience. It is the persistent ache that remains when social contact fails to nourish. Just as the body can eat food that does not provide nutrition, leaving you full but malnourished, so too can you have social interaction that does not provide genuine connection. You go through the motions, you have the conversations, you attend the gatherings, but something essential is missing, and you remain hungry even as you wonder why, when your life contains so many people, you feel so empty. The therapist and researcher Pauline Boss developed a concept that helps illuminate this experience. She called it ambiguous loss, the grief that accompanies relationships that are physically present but psychologically absent. She originally applied this concept to situations like dementia, where a loved one is still alive but no longer fully there. But the concept extends further. It applies to any relationship where the form of connection exists but the substance does not. Where someone is present in your life but absent in the ways that matter most. You may have experienced this with family members who were physically present throughout your childhood but emotionally unavailable. You had parents, siblings, a household. but something essential was missing. And now, in adulthood, you may recreate this pattern without realizing it. You form friendships and relationships that have the shape of connection but not the depth. That include you in activities but not in understanding. That offer the form of belonging without the feeling. And because the form is there, because the relationship exists in some recognizable way, you cannot simply grieve and move on. You're caught in a liminal space, neither fully connected nor fully separate. You cannot mourn what you have not entirely lost. You cannot celebrate what you have not entirely found. You exist in the almost, the in-between, the not quite. And this ambiguity is its own kind of suffering. There is a cycle that often develops for those caught in the pain of almost belonging. It begins with hope. You meet someone new, join a new group, enter a new relationship, and for a moment it feels like this time will be different. This time you will be truly seen. This time the connection will reach all the way down. You allow yourself to hope, to invest, to believe that belonging is finally within reach. But gradually the familiar distance emerges. The conversations that stay surface level, the moments when you reach out and feel the subtle recoil, the growing awareness that once again you're included but not known. And the hope that sustained you begins to curdle into disappointment, into grief, into that familiar ache that you have carried for so long. And then, because the pain of isolation is so great, you try again. You find another potential connection, another group, another relationship, and the cycle repeats. Hope, investment, almost connection, disappointment, grief, over and over, like a wound that never quite heals because it keeps being reopened. This is exhausting, and it can lead to a kind of despair that is difficult to articulate, because you are trying. You're putting yourself out there again and again, and yet the result is always the same. Almost but not quite. Close but not close enough. Included but invisible. And you begin to wonder whether the problem is you, whether there is something fundamentally unlovable about you, something that prevents genuine connection no matter how hard you try. But here is what you may not see. Caught as you are in this painful cycle, the almost is not a measure of your worth. It is not evidence that you are unlovable or incapable of real connection. It is the result of a complex interplay between your early wounds, your protective masks, the limitations of others, and the genuine difficulty of finding people who can truly see you. It is not your failure. It is a tragedy. And there is a difference. The pain of almost belonging is compounded by invisibility, because from the outside, your life may look full. You have friends, acquaintances, perhaps a partner, perhaps family who are present. And so when you try to express your loneliness, you are met with confusion. But you have so many people in your life, but you seem so connected. And this dismissal, well-intentioned as it may be, drives the pain deeper underground. You learn that this particular kind of loneliness is not understood by others, that it sounds like ingratitude or excessive neediness, and so you stop trying to explain it. You carry it alone. But tonight, in the quiet of this moment, you do not have to carry it alone. You can let yourself acknowledge the truth of this experience, the bone-deep weariness of being almost seen, the grief of relationships that look right but feel wrong, the hunger that persists despite all your efforts to feed it. This pain is real, it is valid, it deserves acknowledgement even if no one in your daily life has ever truly understood it. And here is something else that might offer a small measure of comfort. The very sensitivity that makes you aware of the gap between surface inclusion and genuine belonging is not a curse. It is a form of honesty. Many people move through life content with surface connection, unaware of the depths that are possible. But you've always known that something more exists, even if you have rarely experienced it. This knowing is painful, but it is also true, and it points toward what you are really seeking. Not just inclusion, not just presence, but the profound experience of being truly known and accepted exactly as you are. This kind of connection is rare. It cannot be forced or manufactured. It cannot be found by trying harder or performing better. It requires something different. It requires the gradual, terrifying process of removing the masks, of allowing yourself to be seen, of risking rejection in order to make genuine acceptance possible. And this is a journey that takes time, that requires safety, that cannot be rushed. For now, what matters is simply recognizing where you are, acknowledging the pain of the almost, letting yourself grieve the connections that have form but not substance, understanding that your loneliness is not evidence of failure, but a testament to your awareness of what real belonging could feel like. You deserve more than almost. You deserve to be seen, not for your performance, but for who you actually are. You deserve relationships that nourish rather than deplete. You deserve the experience of being known. And while tonight may not be the night you find that, it can be the night you acknowledge your hunger for it, your right to it, your worthiness of it. So breathe. Let the grief of the almost have its space. Let yourself feel the weight of all those connections that never quite connected, and trust that in acknowledging this pain, you are taking a step towards something different, something real, something that has been waiting for you all along. Sometimes the ache of not belonging has roots that go deeper than childhood experience or family dynamics. Sometimes it grows from something more fundamental, a difference in the very way you perceive and process the world, a nervous system wired differently from those around you, a mind that works in ways that others cannot easily understand no matter how much they might try. If you have spent your life feeling like you are operating on a different frequency than everyone else, like you're speaking a language that has no direct translation into the one everyone around you speaks, then this is for you. Because the pain of not belonging takes on a particular quality when the difference is not just emotional or psychological, but neurological. When it is woven into the very fabric of how you experience being alive. There are many ways a mind can be different. Perhaps you've always been more sensitive than those around you, affected more deeply by sounds and lights and textures, overwhelmed by crowds and noise in ways that others seem to navigate effortlessly. Perhaps you feel emotions with an intensity that others find confusing or excessive. Perhaps you notice subtleties that others miss entirely, picking up on shifts in mood and atmosphere that seem invisible to everyone else. And perhaps you've spent your whole life being told that you are too much, too sensitive, too intense, too easily overwhelmed, as if there was something wrong with you for experiencing the world in the way that you do. The psychologist Elaine Aron began studying this trait in the early 1990s. She called it sensory processing sensitivity, and her research revealed that approximately 15 to 20% of the population possesses it. These are the highly sensitive persons, individuals whose nervous systems process stimuli more deeply and thoroughly than average. They are not weak or fragile. They are not overreacting. Their brains are simply designed to take in more information, to process it more completely, to respond to the world with greater depth and nuance. But here is the challenge. The world is not built for the highly sensitive. It is built for the majority, for those who can filter out the noise and navigate the overwhelm without being affected so deeply. Schools are loud and chaotic. Workplaces demand constant interaction and sensory input. Social gatherings pulse with stimulation that others find energizing, but that leaves the highly sensitive person depleted and desperate for solitude. And because this difference is invisible, because there is no outward marker that explains why you need to leave the party early, or why the fluorescent lights make it impossible to concentrate, you're left to explain yourself over and over, or worse, to hide your needs entirely, pretending to be fine while you slowly drown in stimulation. This creates a profound sense of not belonging, not because you are excluded in any obvious way, but because the very environment that others thrive in feels hostile to your system. You watch others move through the world with an ease you cannot replicate. You wonder why everything seems so hard for you, why you cannot just be normal, why you need so much more recovery time and quiet and space. And gradually, without anyone explicitly telling you so, you absorb the message that you are defective, that your sensitivity is a flaw to be overcome rather than a trait to be honoured. But what if the opposite were true? What if your sensitivity were not a weakness, but a different kind of strength? Aron's research suggests that highly sensitive persons, while more easily overwhelmed, also experience positive emotions more intensely. They notice beauty that others overlook. They connect deeply when they find safe relationships. They bring a depth of perception and care that the world desperately needs. The problem is not the sensitivity. The problem is a world that does not make room for it. And sensitivity is only one form of neurological difference. Perhaps your experience is shaped by something else entirely. Perhaps you've always known, or have recently discovered, that your brain works in ways that are categorized as neurodivergent. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, autism spectrum, dyslexia, any of the many variations in neurological functioning that diverge from what is considered typical. These are not disorders in any simple sense. They are differences, ways of being in the world that come with their own challenges and their own gifts. But in a society built around neurotypical norms, they become sources of profound disconnection. If you are neurodivergent, you have likely spent much of your life trying to pass as typical. Masking, researchers call it. The exhausting effort to hide your natural ways of being in order to fit in. You have learned to suppress the movements your body wants to make, to force eye contact that feels unnatural, to navigate social rules that seem arbitrary and confusing while everyone else appears to follow them effortlessly. You have performed normalcy for so long that you may not even remember what it feels like to simply be yourself without filtering, without adjusting, without the constant background effort of translation. The psychologist Damian Milton has described something he calls the double empathy problem. For a long time, researchers believed that autistic individuals had deficits in empathy or social understanding. But Milton suggested something different. The difficulty is not one-sided, it is mutual. Neurotypical people struggle to understand neurodivergent experience just as much as the reverse. The problem is not that neurodivergent individuals lack social ability. The problem is that two different kinds of minds are trying to communicate across a gap that neither fully understands. This reframe matters, because if you have grown up neurodivergent in a neurotypical world, you have almost certainly internalized the message that the failure to connect is your fault, that you are the one who is broken, deficient, unable to do what others do naturally. But the truth is more complex. The truth is that you have been trying to operate in a world designed for different minds, and the exhaustion and isolation you feel are not evidence of your inadequacy. They are the predictable result of spending your life in an environment that was not built for the way you naturally function. There is grief in this recognition, the grief of all the years you blamed yourself, the grief of the connections that might have been possible if only you had understood earlier, the grief of the masks you have worn and the toll they have taken. Let yourself feel this grief if it arises. It is not weakness. It is the natural response to finally seeing the truth of what you have navigated. And then there is another kind of difference, one that is not neurological but cultural. Perhaps you grew up between worlds. Perhaps you are what researchers David Pollock and Ruth Van Rieken call a third culture kid, someone raised in a culture different from their parents' home culture, belonging fully to neither. Perhaps you are an immigrant, carrying one world inside you while living in another. Perhaps you are bicultural, multiracial, existing in the hyphen between identities that others insist on keeping separate. This kind of difference creates its own particular ache of not belonging. You're too much of one thing to fit in one place, and too much of another to fit anywhere else. You move between communities, adjusting your language, your customs, your very way of being. And in each place, some part of you must be left at the door. Some part of you is illegible, untranslatable, forever marking you as other. The sociologist and writer Pauline Park has written about the particular loneliness of those who exist between categories. You do not have a single home to long for, a single community to claim. Your belonging is fragmented across places and cultures that do not know each other. And when you try to explain this fragmentation to those who have always lived in one world, they cannot quite understand. How can you be homeless when you have so many homes? How can you not belong when you belong, at least partially, to so many places? But you know that partial belonging is its own kind of exile. That being welcomed everywhere and fully claimed nowhere creates an ache that those with solid ground cannot imagine. That the constant translation, the eternal adjustment, the endless explaining of yourself to people who see only one piece of your complexity is exhausting in ways that never fully heal. And perhaps you also carry the experience of intellectual difference. Perhaps you are identified early as gifted, as possessing abilities that set you apart from your peers. This might sound like a blessing, and in some ways it is, but it comes with its own isolation. The experience of thinking faster or deeper or more intensely than those around you. The difficulty of finding peers who share your interests. The strange loneliness of being praised for your mind while feeling utterly disconnected from those who praise you. Gifted individuals often experience what psychologists call asynchronous development. Their intellectual abilities race ahead of their emotional and social development, creating a mismatch that is confusing both to them and to others. They may connect easily with adults but struggle with age mates. They may feel bored and understimulated in environments designed for typical development. They may wrestle with existential questions that their peers have not yet encountered, feeling ancient in their concerns while chronologically young. And like other forms of difference, intellectual intensity is often met with misunderstanding. You're told to tone it down, to not show off, to stop asking so many questions. You learn that your natural way of engaging with the world makes others uncomfortable, and so you learn to hide this part of yourself too, to pretend to be less curious, less intense, less hungry for understanding than you actually are. Another mask, another layer of concealment, another barrier between your authentic self and the belonging you crave. Whatever form your difference takes, whether it is sensitivity or neurodivergence or cultural complexity or intellectual intensity, the result is often the same. You've spent your life feeling like a stranger in a world that was not designed for you. You have exhausted yourself trying to translate your experience into terms that others can understand. You have hidden parts of yourself to avoid the rejection that visibility seemed to invite, and you have carried, quietly and persistently, the ache of being fundamentally other. But here is what you may not have been told. Your difference is not a defect. It is not something to be fixed or overcome or hidden. It is a variation in the vast diversity of human experience. It comes with genuine challenges, yes. It makes belonging harder in a world that rewards conformity. But it also brings gifts that the typical cannot offer: depth of perception, intensity of experience, the ability to see what others miss, the capacity to question what others take for granted, the courage to exist in the spaces between categories that most people cannot even see. The loneliness of being different is real. It deserves acknowledgement. But so does the beauty of your particular way of being. And perhaps, just perhaps, the belonging you seek will not be found by becoming more like everyone else. Perhaps it will be found by embracing what makes you different, by finding the rare others who share your frequency, by creating spaces where your kind of mind, your kind of sensitivity, your kind of complexity is not just tolerated but celebrated. This is not easy. It requires giving up the fantasy that you will someday figure out how to be normal. It requires grieving the ease of belonging that others seem to possess naturally. It requires accepting that your path to connection will look different, that it may take longer, that it may require more intention and less spontaneity. But it also opens a door to relationships that truly fit, to communities that genuinely understand, to a sense of belonging that is not based on hiding but on being seen. For now, in this moment, let yourself rest in the recognition of your difference. Let yourself honour what you have navigated. Let yourself grieve what it has cost you. And let yourself, perhaps for the first time, consider the possibility that being different is not the problem, that the world's inability to make room for you is not your failure, that you were never meant to fit into spaces that could not hold your complexity. You're not too much. You're not too different. You're simply you, in all your irreducible particularity. And that is not something to overcome. That is something to inhabit, fully, gently, with compassion for how long you have tried to be otherwise. Breathe, rest. You have carried the weight of difference for so long, and tonight you can set it down. When belonging feels perpetually out of reach, when you have spent your life on the outside looking in, a particular kind of hope begins to form. It is the hope that somewhere, out there, your people exist, that there is a place where you will finally fit, a city, a community, a group, a relationship that will provide what has always been missing. And this hope, as beautiful as it is, can become its own kind of trap, because it keeps you searching, it keeps you moving, it keeps you believing that belonging is just around the next corner in the next place with the next set of people. And you never quite arrive. You know this search. You've lived it perhaps for years, perhaps for decades. the restless sense that wherever you are is not quite right, the fantasy of starting over somewhere new, the belief that if you could just find the right environment, the right community, the right context, you would finally feel at home. And so you have moved, changed jobs, ended relationships, joined new groups, tried new cities. You have reinvented yourself again and again, always hoping that this time, this version, this place will be the one where you finally belong. There is a name for this pattern. Some psychologists call it destination addiction, the belief that happiness and fulfillment exists somewhere other than where you currently are. It manifests as a constant orientation toward the future, toward the next thing, toward the life that awaits once you reach some imagined destination. And for those who carry the wound of not belonging, this destination is not a career goal or a financial milestone. It is the simple, profound experience of being at home, of fitting, of finally not feeling like an outsider. And so you search. With genuine hope and genuine exhaustion, you research cities known for their open-minded communities. You seek out groups organized around your particular interests or identities. You end friendships that feel hollow and begin new ones with the conviction that these will be different. You leave relationships where you felt unseen and enter new ones believing that this person, at last, will truly understand you. The search becomes the organizing principle of your life, always moving toward, never quite arriving. Maybe you have had moments when it seemed to work, when you moved to a new city and felt for a few months a sense of possibility and freedom, when you found a group that seemed to understand you better than anyone before, when you met someone whose presence made you feel, briefly, like you had finally come home. These moments are real. They are not illusions. But if you are honest with yourself, you know what came next. The gradual return of the familiar ache, the creeping recognition that the new place, the new people, the new relationship contained the same patterns you thought you had escaped. The devastating realization that you had travelled all that way only to find yourself exactly where you started. This is the painful truth that those who search for belonging must eventually confront. The problem travels with you, not because you are the problem, not in any blaming sense, but because the wound of not belonging lives inside you. It is not a product of your environment, not primarily. It is a pattern of perception, a way of relating, a set of beliefs and expectations that you carry wherever you go. And no external change, no matter how dramatic, can heal an internal wound. Sigmund Freud observed this phenomenon over a century ago. He called it repetition compulsion, the tendency to unconsciously recreate familiar patterns even when they cause suffering. We gravitate toward what we know, even when what we know is painful. We choose partners who echo our earliest attachment figures. We create dynamics in new relationships that mirror the dynamics of old ones. We find ways to feel like outsiders even in the most welcoming environments, because outsiderness is what we know. It is our familiar territory. And the psyche, for all its longing for healing, often clings to the familiar even at the cost of happiness. This is not your fault. Please hear that. The repetition is not a conscious choice. It is not evidence of self-sabotage or unwillingness to change. It is the natural operation of a wounded system trying to make sense of the world using the only templates it has. You did not choose to. Carry the outsider pattern with you. You did not decide to recreate isolation in every new context. These patterns were installed early and operate beneath conscious awareness. They are not failures of will, they are wounds that have not yet healed. But understanding this can bring a different kind of grief. The grief of recognizing that the search, as hopeful as it has been, may never deliver what you seek, that there is no perfect place, no ideal community, no flawless relationship waiting somewhere to receive you, that the belonging you long for cannot be found by moving, by changing, by reinventing. This grief is heavy. It can feel like despair, like the final closing of a door you'd always hoped would open. And yet, there is something on the other side of this grief, something that only becomes visible when you stop searching long enough to see it. Because the end of the external search is not the end of hope. It is the beginning of a different kind of journey, a journey inward. A journey toward the only place where belonging can truly be found. Psychologists who study well-being have identified something called the hedonic treadmill. It refers to the tendency of humans to quickly adapt to changes in their circumstances, returning to a baseline level of happiness regardless of external improvements. Win the lottery, and within a year your happiness returns to where it was before. Move to your dream city, and within months it becomes ordinary. The new wears off, the excitement fades, and you are left once again with yourself. This is not a flaw in human psychology, it is a feature. It points toward a truth that the searching mind does not want to hear. External circumstances have far less power over our well-being than we imagine. The environment matters, yes, relationships matter, but beneath all of it, the quality of your experience is determined primarily by what is happening inside you, by your relationship with yourself, by the patterns of thought and perception that you carry, by the wound that no amount of external searching can reach. The existential therapist Irvin Yalom wrote about something he called existential loneliness. It is the recognition that, at the deepest level, each of us is fundamentally alone. We are born alone. We die alone. And no matter how intimate our relationships, there remains an unbridgeable gap between our inner experience and that of any other person. This is not a pessimistic view. It is simply an honest one. And for those who have spent their lives searching for a belonging that would finally fill the void, it offers a strange kind of freedom. Because if some degree of loneliness is inherent to the human condition, then your inability to find perfect belonging is not a personal failure. It is not evidence that something is uniquely wrong with you. It is the common experience of being human, perhaps felt more acutely by you because of your wounds, but shared in some form by everyone who has ever lived. You are not alone in your aloneness, and paradoxically, recognizing this can be the beginning of a different kind of connection. The search for belonging is not wrong. It is deeply human. It grows from a genuine need, a real wound, an authentic longing for connection. And the hope that drove your searching was not foolish. It was the heart's way of reaching toward healing. Honoring that hope, even as you recognize its limitations, is important. You are not naive to believe that belonging might be found. You are simply looking in the only places you knew to look. But now, perhaps, you're ready to look somewhere else. Not outward, toward the next place, or person, or community, but inward, toward the relationship that underlies all others, the relationship with yourself, because this is where the wound lives, and this is where it must be healed, not by finding external acceptance, but by learning slowly and gently to accept yourself, not by being received by others, but by learning to receive yourself. not by belonging to something out there, but by coming home to what is already here. This is not a quick fix. It is not a simple reframe that will make the ache disappear. The work of internal belonging is slow, patient, often painful. It requires facing the parts of yourself that you have hidden. It requires grieving what you did not receive. It requires learning new ways of relating to yourself that you were never taught. And it cannot be done alone, not entirely. You may need support, guidance, companionship on the journey. But the destination, if it can be called that, is not somewhere else. It is here, it is now, it is you. And here is what you might discover if you stay with this journey long enough. The ache of not belonging does not disappear entirely. Some whisper of it may always remain. But its quality changes. It becomes less desperate, less consuming, less like a driving force that propels you from place to place, and more like a tender spot that occasionally aches, but no longer controls your life. You learn to be with the loneliness without being destroyed by it. You learn to connect imperfectly without needing perfection. You learn that you can belong partially and impermanently, while also accepting the irreducible aloneness that comes with being human. This is not settling. It is not giving up on connection. It is the mature recognition that the fantasy of perfect belonging was always just that, a fantasy. And in releasing that fantasy, you make room for something real, for connections that are imperfect but genuine, for relationships that do not complete you but accompany you, for a sense of home that is not dependent on external circumstances but arises from within. The search is exhausting. You've been running for so long, and tonight, just for now, you can stop. You can rest in the recognition that there is nowhere else to go, that the belonging you seek is not waiting in some distant place, that it has been here, inside you, all along, buried beneath the wound, waiting to be uncovered. Breathe. Let the restlessness settle. Let the fantasy of somewhere else soften its grip. You are already where you need to be. The journey continues, but it is a different kind of journey now, one that begins and ends in the same place. Here, now, home. There comes a moment, sometimes after years of searching, when something shifts. It is not dramatic. It is not a sudden revelation that changes everything in an instant. It is quieter than that, more like a softening, a releasing, a slow turning of attention from out there to in here. From the endless search for a place to belong to the radical possibility that you might learn to belong to yourself. This is the beginning of coming home, not to a place or a community or a relationship, but the only home you have ever truly had, the one you carry with you, the one you are. This shift does not mean giving up on connection with others. It does not mean resigning yourself to isolation or deciding that relationships do not matter. Connection matters deeply. Humans are wired for it. But here is what the years of searching may have taught you. External connection cannot fill an internal void. Other people cannot give you a sense of belonging if you do not first belong to yourself. The love of others cannot reach you if you are hiding from yourself. And so the work of healing, the real work, must begin within. What does it mean to belong to yourself? It sounds abstract, perhaps even impossible if you have spent your life feeling like a stranger in your own skin. But it is simpler than it sounds. It means treating yourself as someone worthy of your own care and attention. It means listening to your own needs with the same respect you would offer a dear friend. It means staying present with yourself, even when what you find there is painful or uncomfortable. It means no longer abandoning yourself in the ways you were once abandoned by others. The researcher Brené Brown has written extensively about belonging, and one of her most profound insights is that true belonging does not require you to change who you are to be accepted by others. True belonging, she argues, begins with self-acceptance, with what she calls belonging to yourself. This is the foundation upon which all other belonging is built. Because if you do not accept yourself, if you are constantly at war with who you are, then no amount of external acceptance will feel real. It will always feel conditional, temporary, at risk of being revoked the moment your true self is revealed. But self-acceptance is easier said than done, especially if you've spent your life receiving messages that who you are is not acceptable, that you are too much or not enough, that your needs are burdensome, your feelings excessive, your very existence somehow problematic. These messages do not simply evaporate because you decide to accept yourself. They have been internalized. They have become part of how you think about yourself, how you treat yourself, how you expect to be treated. And undoing them requires more than willpower. It requires a fundamental reorientation of your relationship with yourself. The psychologist Kristin Neff has spent her career studying self-compassion, and her research offers a framework for this reorientation. She describes self-compassion as having 3 components. The first is self-kindness, treating yourself with warmth and understanding rather than harsh judgment when you suffer or fail. The second is common humanity, recognizing that suffering and imperfection are part of the shared human experience rather than evidence of your personal inadequacy. The third is mindfulness, being present with your pain without being overwhelmed by it or trying to suppress it. For those who have never belonged, each of these components can feel foreign. You may have learned to treat yourself harshly because harsh treatment was what you knew. You may have believed that your suffering was unique, evidence of your fundamental brokenness rather than part of the human condition. You may have learned to avoid your pain at all costs, to numb it or distract from it or push it away because no one ever helped you hold it. And so learning self-compassion is not just adopting a new attitude, it is unlearning years of conditioning. It is rewiring patterns that were installed before you had any say in the matter. But it can be done slowly, gently, with patience for how difficult it is and how long it takes. And the beginning is simpler than you might think. It begins with noticing how you speak to yourself when you make a mistake. Noticing the harshness, the criticism, the impossible standards you hold yourself to. Noticing the ways you abandon yourself, betray yourself, refuse yourself the care you would readily offer to someone else. This noticing is not meant to add another layer of self-judgment. It is meant to create space, to interrupt the automatic patterns long enough for something new to emerge. And what emerges when you stay with this practice long enough is a different kind of relationship with yourself, one where you become your own ally rather than your own enemy, where you learn to comfort yourself in distress rather than compounding the distress with criticism, where you begin to offer yourself the belonging you have sought from others all your life. This is not narcissism. It is not self-indulgence. It is the basic care that every human being deserves and that you, for reasons not of your choosing, did not receive. The psychotherapist Richard Schwartz developed a model of the psyche called internal family systems. In this model, the mind is not a single unified entity, but a collection of different parts, each with its own perspective, its own needs, its own role in the system. There are protective parts that try to keep you safe, sometimes through strategies that cause suffering. There are wounded parts that carry the pain of past experiences. And there is what Schwartz calls the self, a core of consciousness that is inherently compassionate, curious, and calm. Healing, in this model, involves learning to access the self, and from that place, offering care and understanding to all the other parts. What if you approached yourself this way? Not as a single entity that is broken or flawed, but as a complex system of parts, each of which makes sense when you understand its history. The part of you that hides, that learned hiding was necessary for survival. The part of you that attacks yourself, that internalized the critical voices of those who could not accept you. The part of you that yearns for belonging, that has never stopped hoping. The part of you that despairs, that has been disappointed too many times to keep hoping. Each of these parts carries something important. Each deserves to be heard. And you, from the calm center of your being, can learn to listen. This is inner work. It cannot be rushed or forced. It requires sitting with yourself in ways that may feel uncomfortable at first. Many people who have never belonged have also never learned to be truly alone with themselves. Solitude feels like exile, a reminder of all the times they were left out, left behind, left alone. But there is a difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is the painful absence of connection. Solitude is the nourishing presence of yourself, and learning to transform loneliness into solitude is one of the most important skills you can develop. Researchers who study solitude have found that it is not inherently negative. In fact, chosen solitude, time spent alone intentionally and willingly, is associated with greater self-knowledge, creativity, and emotional regulation. The key is the word chosen. Solitude that is imposed feels like rejection. Solitude that is chosen feels like freedom. And as you develop a stronger relationship with yourself, as you learn to enjoy your own company, solitude becomes less something to be endured and more something to be savoured. This does not mean you no longer need others. You do. Connection remains essential. But when you can be nourished by solitude, when you're not desperately fleeing from yourself into the company of others, your relationships change. They become less driven by need and more characterized by genuine desire. You connect because you want to, not because you cannot bear to be alone. And this shift, subtle as it may seem, transforms the quality of your connections entirely. Coming home to yourself also means learning to give yourself what you needed, but did not receive. This is a practice sometimes called reparenting, and it involves treating yourself with the care, attention, and unconditional positive regard that every child deserves. If you did not have a parent who delighted in you, you can learn to delight in yourself. If you did not have a parent who comforted you when you were distressed, you can learn to comfort yourself. If you did not have a parent who saw you clearly and accepted what they saw, you can learn to see and accept yourself. This may sound strange. How can you give yourself what you did not receive? How can you be your own parent? But consider this. The child who needed those things is still within you. They are the wounded parts, the lonely parts, the parts that still ache for what was missing. And you, the adult you have become, have capacities that child did not have. You can offer comfort, you can offer attention, you can offer the steady, patient, unconditional regard that tells the wounded child within you that they are worthy, that they always were, that the failure to receive this was not their fault. the psychologist Carl Rogers described something he called unconditional positive regard. It is the experience of being accepted completely, without conditions, without needing to earn approval through performance or achievement. Most people who struggle with belonging never received this. Their acceptance was always conditional, always contingent on being good enough, quiet enough, acceptable enough. And they learned that they had to earn their place, that belonging was a transaction, that love was something you worked for rather than something you simply received. But what if you offered yourself unconditional positive regard? What if you decided as a practice and a discipline to accept yourself completely? Not because you are perfect, not because you have earned it, but simply because you exist, because you are a human being worthy of your own care simply by virtue of being alive. This is radical. It goes against everything you may have learned, but it is the foundation of coming home to yourself. And here is what happens when you begin this work. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the desperate need for external belonging begins to soften, not because you no longer want connection, but because you're no longer starving for it. You become less willing to wear masks because you've discovered that the face beneath the masks is worthy of acceptance. You become less tolerant of relationships that require you to hide because you have learned that hiding costs you too much. You become more willing to risk rejection because you know that even if others reject you, you will not reject yourself. You have become your own home, and from that home, you can venture out into the world without the desperate fear that you will be left homeless if things do not work out. This is not the end of loneliness. You will still feel lonely sometimes. You will still ache for connection. You will still have moments when the old wound throbs and the old despair surfaces. But underneath these passing storms there will be something solid, something that does not depend on external circumstances, a ground to stand on, a home to return to. Yourself. Breathe. Let this possibility settle into you. You have spent so long looking for a home outside yourself. And all along the home was here, waiting, patient, ready to receive you whenever you were ready to arrive. You are arriving now, gently, slowly. There is no rush. The home is not going anywhere. It has always been here. It is you. Rest in this. Let yourself be held, not by external arms, but by your own willingness to finally stop running from yourself, to stay, to be present, to belong to the only one who can never leave you. You. Welcome home. Something beautiful happens when you stop chasing belonging and start creating it instead. When you release the desperate search for a place where you finally fit and begin to cultivate connection from a different place within yourself. This is not about trying harder or searching more strategically. It is about a fundamental shift in orientation, from seeking to being, from performing to revealing, from trying to belong somewhere out there to allowing, belonging to emerge from who you actually are. This shift does not guarantee that you will suddenly find yourself surrounded by people who understand you, but it changes the quality of every connection you do make. And over time, it builds something that the searching never could, a sense of home that you carry with you, a belonging that cannot be taken away because it was never dependent on external validation in the first place. When you begin to belong to yourself, when you've done the quiet inner work of self-acceptance and self-compassion, something shifts in how you show up in the world. The masks become harder to wear. The performances feel increasingly false. The old strategies of hiding and adapting, which once felt necessary for survival, start to feel like cages, and gradually, almost without deciding to, you begin to show more of your real self, not all at once, not recklessly, but in small moments of authenticity, in places that feel safe enough to risk being seen. And here is what research consistently shows. Authenticity attracts connection. When you allow yourself to be genuinely seen, you become more attractive to the kinds of people who can genuinely connect with you. The relationships that form around your masks attract people who resonate with the masks. But the relationships that form around your authentic self attract people who resonate with you. This is not a guarantee. Not everyone will accept your real self. Some will turn away. Some relationships that seemed solid when you were performing may falter when you stop. But what remains, what builds, will be real. And real connection, even if rarer, is infinitely more nourishing than performed inclusion. The psychologist and researcher Susan Harter has studied authenticity for decades. Her work shows that people who feel able to express their true selves in relationships report higher quality connections and greater well-being. This is not surprising when you think about it. How can you feel truly connected to someone who does not know who you truly are? How can you receive the belonging you crave if you're hiding the self that needs to belong? The masks that were designed to secure belonging actually prevent it. They create the appearance of connection while blocking the real thing. But removing the masks requires courage. It requires a willingness to be rejected for who you actually are rather than accepted for who you are pretending to be. And this is terrifying, especially if you have learned through years of experience that your authentic self is not welcome. The fear of rejection that drove you into hiding in the first place does not disappear simply because you decide to be authentic. It must be faced again and again. In small moments of vulnerability that gradually teach your nervous system a new lesson, that authenticity, while risky, does not always lead to rejection. That some people, the right people, will welcome what you have been hiding. That you can survive being seen, even if not everyone likes what they see. This is a practice, not a destination. You do not suddenly become authentic and then stay that way forever. You practice authenticity, moment by moment, choice by choice. You notice when you're about to put on a mask and you pause. You ask yourself whether the mask is truly necessary or simply habitual. You take small risks, revealing a little more than feels comfortable, and you observe what happens. Sometimes you will be met with warmth, sometimes with indifference, sometimes with rejection. But each time you survive, each time you discover that you can be real and still be okay, the practice becomes a little easier. The masks become a little less essential, and the authentic self becomes a little more accessible. Belonging, you will discover, is not something you find. It is something you create through daily choices, through the courage to be seen, through the patience to build connections slowly, one genuine interaction at a time. It is not a state you achieve, but a practice you maintain. And like any practice, it has its rhythms. There will be periods of greater connection and periods of greater solitude. There will be moments when belonging feels solid, and moments when the old ache returns. This is normal. This is human. The goal is not to eliminate loneliness forever, but to develop a different relationship with it. To know that you can feel lonely without being destroyed by it. To trust that connection will return because you're no longer hiding from it. There is paradox at the heart of belonging that is worth understanding. The more you accept your own not belonging, the more you are able to genuinely belong. This sounds contradictory, but it reflects a deep truth. When you are desperately trying to belong, when your happiness depends on being accepted, you approach relationships from a place of need. And this need distorts everything. It makes you perform rather than connect. It makes you cling rather than relate. It makes you interpret neutral signals as rejection and miss genuine opportunities for connection because you are too busy managing your fear. But when you accept that you may never belong in the way you once fantasized, when you release the desperate grip on external acceptance, something loosens. You become less needy, less grasping, less afraid. You can approach relationships with genuine curiosity rather than hidden agenda. You can allow connections to develop naturally rather than forcing them into shapes they were never meant to take. And paradoxically, this acceptance of potential non-belonging makes real belonging far more likely, because you are finally available for it, finally open to it, finally able to receive what you were too busy chasing to accept. Perhaps one of the most important shifts in this process is the move from quantity to quality, from trying to belong everywhere to belonging deeply somewhere. The ache of not belonging often carries with it a fantasy of universal acceptance, of being the kind of person who fits in easily, who is welcomed by everyone, who never feels like an outsider. But this fantasy is not only unattainable, it is not even desirable. Universal acceptance would require such extreme self-modification that there would be no self left to accept. The people who seem to fit in everywhere often do so by becoming so generic, so inoffensive, so carefully adapted to every environment that they have lost touch with their own authenticity. What you actually need is not to belong everywhere, it is to belong somewhere, to pursue connections that are genuine, deep and real, to be truly known by a small number of people rather than superficially included by many. Research on social connection consistently shows that the quality of relationships matters far more than the quantity. A few close friends predict well-being far better than many acquaintances. Depth trumps breadth. Authenticity trumps popularity. And the outsider who cultivates a handful of genuine connections may actually be better off than the social butterfly who knows everyone but is truly known by no one. This is selective belonging, the conscious choice to invest your limited energy in connections that actually nourish you, rather than spreading yourself thin trying to be accepted by everyone. It means being willing to release relationships that require performance. It means being okay with not fitting in certain contexts so that you can fit more deeply in others. It means accepting that you will not be for everyone, that some people will not understand you, and that this is not a problem to be solved but a reality to be accepted. The psychologists Morris Rosenberg and Gregory McCullough have written about a concept called mattering, the feeling that you are significant to others, that you make a difference in their lives, that your presence is noticed and valued. Mattering is a component of belonging that is often overlooked. It is not enough to be included. You need to feel that your inclusion matters, that you bring something to the relationships you are part of, that people would notice if you disappeared. And this sense of mattering does not come from being accepted by large numbers of people. It comes from being genuinely valued by the few who truly know you. As you practice creating belonging rather than seeking it, you may discover something unexpected. The very struggles that made belonging so difficult have given you gifts. The sensitivity that made you feel like an outsider has made you deeply attuned to others' pain. The years of observing from the margins have given you insight into social dynamics that those in the center cannot see. The wound of not belonging has made you appreciate genuine connection in ways that those who take belonging for granted never will. This is not to say that the pain was worth it or that you should be grateful for your suffering, but it is to say that the suffering has shaped you, and some of what it has shaped is beautiful. Psychologists who study post-traumatic growth have found that people who have struggled often develop capacities that those who have not struggled lack. Greater empathy, deeper wisdom, a more authentic sense of self, a clearer understanding of what really matters. The struggle with belonging, as painful as it has been, may have given you these gifts, and as you move forward, as you create belonging rather than chase it, these gifts become part of what you bring to your connections. They become part of what makes you valuable to those who truly see you. You may never feel like you belong everywhere. You may always carry some whisper of the outsider within you, but this does not have to be a curse. It can be a gift. The outsider sees what the insider cannot. The one who has never taken belonging for granted understands its preciousness in ways that the effortlessly included never will. And the connections you form, built on authenticity rather than performance, chosen rather than merely available, may be deeper and more nourishing than any you could have found through the desperate search. So breathe. Let yourself settle into this new understanding. Belonging is not somewhere else. It is not waiting for you in a different city or a different group or a different relationship. It is here. It is in you. It is in the way you show up, authentically and courageously. It is in the small moments of genuine connection that you cultivate. It is in the choice, made again and again, to be real rather than acceptable, to be known rather than merely included, to belong to yourself so deeply that external belonging becomes a gift rather than a necessity. You have spent so long feeling like you do not fit, and perhaps you never will fit, not in the way you once imagined, but fitting is overrated. Belonging is not about fitting into spaces that were not made for you. It is about finding or creating spaces where you can be fully yourself, where your difference is welcomed rather than merely tolerated, where you matter not despite who you are but because of it. These spaces may be small, a single friendship, a partner who truly sees you, a community of others who share your particular way of being in the world. They may not look like the universal belonging you once fantasized about, but they will be real. And real belonging, even in small doses, changes everything. It teaches your nervous system that you are safe. It heals the wound that searching could never heal. It gives you a home, not in a place, but in connection, in presence, in the choice to show up, fully and authentically, and to let the chips fall where they may. This is the belonging you create, not found, not earned, created, through presence, through courage, through the slow, patient work of becoming yourself and offering that self to the world. It is not perfect, it is not constant, but it is real, and it is yours. Rest in this. Let it be enough for tonight. Tomorrow the practice continues, but tonight you have arrived at understanding, at acceptance, at the beginning of a different way. Breathe. You are already home. And now, as the quiet settles around you, let everything we have explored tonight begin to soften. Let the understanding rest gently in your mind without needing to hold it too tightly. You have travelled through so much, the ache that has lived in you for so long, the roots that stretch back further than memory, the masks you have worn and the search that never quite ended, and finally, the slow turning toward home, toward yourself. You're not broken. You never were. You are a human being who's carried a particular kind of a loneliness, and that loneliness has shaped you in ways both painful and beautiful. Tonight, you do not need to fix anything. You do not need to become anyone other than who you already are. You simply need to rest. Let your breath deepen. Let your body grow heavy. Let the ache, if it is still there, be held by the darkness around you. You belong to this moment. You belong to the quiet. You belong to yourself. And that is enough. That has always been enough. So close your eyes now. Let go of the day. Let go of the searching. You are already home. You are already held. Rest now. Rest.